And on my legal pad, I take my pen at the beginning of the meeting, and up at the right-hand corner, I put a letter L for listening, about 3 inches up there in that right-hand corner, so I could visually see it. And during that meeting, I would look at that L, and I'd say, John, listen, listen, listen. How can I become the kind of person who understands people, who really knows what people want? And we have the insight into how to work with them, to really add value to them, to really make a difference in their life. And the answer to that question is, we can do this if we become an intentional listener. Wow. I was very fortunate. My mother was the best listener I've ever known. And she always had time. Now, my father was a very successful man of action. But my mother understood, as children growing up, that the best thing she could do is to listen to us. And she listened until we were finished. I mean, there was no rush. There was no push. There was no interruption. She just listened. And I look back now today at things like being very secure, being very comfortable in my own skin, having a sense of self-worth. And I think it's all wrapped up into the fact that my mother, day in, day out, by just listening to me, instilled that in me. She basically was saying, John, what you say is important, who you are is important, and I'm going to listen to you. My mother was intentional in her listening. She wasn't passive. It wasn't that she was just hearing a discussion and she had nowhere else to go and nothing else to do, so she's listening. She was intentional. She knew that the act of listening is one of the greatest ways to show people that you truly value them. Now, regretfully, I had a little bit more of my dad, the action part, than my mother, the listening part. So when I started off in my career, I wasn't listening very much. I had visions. I was getting people on the leadership train. We were going places. And I really didn't have a lot of time for listening until one day, one of my staff members came up and said, John, you don't listen to us. And I said, what do you mean I don't listen to you? And she looked at me very confidently, said, no, you really don't listen. You want us to hear your vision, but when we want to share with you where we are, you're not really that interested in us. Oh, that cut me deeply. In fact, I went home and shared it with my wife, Margaret, and Margaret agreed. She said, I think you've really got to work in this area. And I can remember for the next 3 years, I would sit in meetings with groups of teams, and on my legal pad, I'd take my pen at the beginning of the meeting, and up at the right-hand corner, I put a letter L for listening, about 3 inches up there in that right-hand corner, so I could visually see it. And during that meeting, I would look at that L, and I'd say, John, listen, listen, listen. A humorous story about listening to this. Once at a gala ball, President Teddy Roosevelt kind of grew tired of meeting people who returned his remarks with, kind of like stiff, mindless pleasantries. So he began to greet people with a smile saying, I murdered my grandmother this morning. And most people, they were so nervous at meeting the president, they didn't even hear what he said. But one diplomat, upon hearing the president's remark, leaned over and he whispered, I'm sure she had it coming to her. Well, I hope that through the humorous story or my example of my mom or the fact that how I changed, that you're getting the big idea. And the big idea is very simple. We overvalue talking and we undervalue listening. And if you want to make a difference with others, we must become intentional listeners. Let's do that today.